It was February 2020 in Hemphill, Texas. A small town where people knew their neighbors and life moved slowly. But everything changed on the night of February 3rd. In the early hours of February 4th, deputies from the Sabine County Sheriff's Office received a call that would shatter the calm of their community. A car had been found along Farm to Market Road 83, just outside of town. It was sitting on the side of the road with its lights still on. When officers arrived, they expected a stranded driver or maybe someone asleep behind the wheel. But what they found was far more disturbing. Inside the car was 19-year-old Livye Lewis, lifeless. She had been shot in the head. The wound was clear and fatal. There were no signs of movement, no indication that she had tried to get away. She had died right there in the driver's seat. The scene was chilling. Police quickly secured the area. The car was towed for forensic analysis, and detectives began piecing together what little they had. There were no eyewitnesses, no surveillance cameras nearby, and no immediate clues pointing to who might have wanted Livye dead. But something didn't sit right. Livye wasn't the kind of person to get caught up in danger. She was young, bright, and had her whole life ahead of her. Friends described her as full of life, someone who loved deeply and made people laugh. She had dreams, big ones, and was working hard to make them happen. So who would do this to her? Investigators had one lead. Someone she had known for years. Someone who had once held her heart and had broken it more than once. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a random act of violence. The person responsible may have been someone very close to her. Before we continue, welcome to Crime Uncovered, where every case has a story, and the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button to stay updated on the latest true crime cases we uncover. And to our returning subscribers, thank you for your continued support. Don't forget to like this video so it reaches more people who care about the truth behind the headlines. I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. So back to the case. To understand how things went so wrong, investigators had to look closely at Livye Lewis's background, especially her complicated relationship with Matthew Edgar. Livye wasn't just another small-town girl. She was bright, cheerful, and deeply loved by her family and friends. She had a kind heart and was known for her free spirit. She loved animals, enjoyed art, and had dreams of building a good life. But behind her smile, there were signs of emotional strain. Many of them linked to a boy she had known since they were young. Livye and Matthew grew up in Hemphill, Texas, a close-knit town where almost everyone knew each other. Their families were acquainted, and their childhoods often overlapped. As teenagers, their friendship blossomed into a romance. At first, it seemed innocent. Two young people falling in love in a small town. But over time, things began to shift. Matthew wasn't the same boy Livye had known as a child. He had grown into someone moody, possessive, and often unpredictable. Friends and family noticed the changes. Their relationship had become turbulent, marked by breakups and makeups that wore on Livye emotionally. Arguments became more frequent. Jealousy crept in. And it wasn't just private tension. Others around them could feel it too. Friends later recalled that there were moments that made them uncomfortable. Times when Matthew's behavior felt controlling. Still, Livye tried to see the good in him. Like many young women in similar situations, she hoped things would get better. But over time, she became tired of the emotional roller coaster. She began pulling away. Her loved ones noticed a shift. Livye wasn't as happy anymore. She eventually started dating someone else, hoping for a fresh start. But Matthew didn't take the breakup well. He would reach out, sometimes in ways that felt desperate or unsettling. He simply couldn't accept that she was trying to move on. Despite all the ups and downs, on the night of February 3rd, 2022, Livye and Matthew were seen together again. They had gone to a Super Bowl party, arriving as a couple. This surprised some people who thought their relationship had ended. Witnesses said Livye looked calm, but Matthew seemed more reserved, quiet, maybe even distant. Some people sensed a strange energy between them, but no one spoke up. No one thought that night would be different from all the other times they had gotten back together. No one could have predicted what was coming. By the next morning, Livye Lewis was dead. And the last person seen with her was Matthew Edgar. What happened after the party? Why did the timeline feel so off? And why did Matthew's story keep changing? Once Livye's body was discovered, the investigation shifted into high gear. Detectives needed to piece together the final hours of her life, and they began with what seemed like a normal social event. A Super Bowl party held on the night of February 3, 2020. Multiple people at the party confirmed seeing Livye and Matthew together. Although their past was rocky, nothing at the gathering gave off immediate signs of conflict. They appeared composed. Some guests recalled them keeping a low profile, not drawing much attention. But calm moments can be deceiving. Not long after midnight, the couple left the party together. That brief exit would become a turning point, because no one ever saw Livye alive again after that. Matthew would later tell authorities that he had dropped Livye off at her cousin's house. But this claim didn't hold up under scrutiny. Investigators found no evidence that Livye ever arrived at the cousin's home, nor was there any indication she intended to go there that night. Her phone activity, the absence of communication, and the lack of witnesses all pointed to a different reality. The discovery of her lifeless body inside her own vehicle, abandoned along FM 83, not far from the location of the party, cast immediate doubt on Matthew's story. Police began to dig deeper into his movements. His phone records placed him near the area where Livye's car was found, within a time window that aligned closely with when detectives believed she was killed. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. Investigators also combed through their digital communications. Text messages exchanged between Livye and Matthew painted a picture of a strained and emotionally heavy relationship. Some messages revealed that Livye had been attempting to move on. Others showed Matthew struggling to accept that it was over. The conversation ranged from emotional to tense, at times even confrontational. Then came the forensic evidence. Livye had been shot at close range, right there in the driver's seat of her car. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses. It was quick, quiet, almost as if someone had made sure there would be no noise, no alert, no chance for Livye to cry out for help. The physical and digital trails, text messages, cell tower pings, the location of the car, and the bullet wound, all led investigators to one unavoidable conclusion. But when confronted, Matthew wasn't giving them the answers they needed. Instead of cooperating, he pulled away. And then, he vanished. By the early hours of February 4, 2020, just hours after Livye's body was found, investigators zeroed in on the person at the center of their suspicions, Matthew Edgar. He had been the last known person to see her alive, and the inconsistencies in his statements were piling up fast. Initially, Matthew appeared cooperative. He didn't resist being brought in for questioning. In fact, he seemed willing to talk. But when the conversation began, his version of events was oddly simplistic. He repeated the same basic story. They left the party, and he dropped Livye off at her cousin's house. That was it. No elaboration, no emotion, no concern. What stood out most wasn't what he said, but how he said it. Detectives noticed a striking lack of urgency in his demeanor. He didn't ask how Livye had died. He didn't show signs of grief or disbelief. His face remained neutral, almost detached. For investigators who had seen countless cases, this lack of reaction was a red flag. And then the cracks in his story began to widen. His timeline wasn't consistent. Small details shifted each time he repeated them. He couldn't clearly account for his whereabouts after leaving the party. When officers asked about what he wore that night, the clothing was nowhere to be found. That raised more questions than answers. As part of their investigation, detectives examined his truck, the same vehicle he allegedly used to drive Livye that night. Something about it seemed off. The passenger seat appeared freshly cleaned. There were smudges and patterns consistent with someone wiping down surfaces. To police, it looked like an attempt to remove evidence, perhaps fingerprints, blood, or other forensic traces. Yet, despite the growing suspicion, they faced a frustrating hurdle. There was no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, and no surveillance footage that captured the shooting itself. The circumstantial evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough. at least not yet, to press charges. The law demanded more than hunches. It needed proof. So for the time being, they had to let him go. In the days that followed, Matthew's behavior took a noticeable turn. He distanced himself from everyone. He stopped returning messages and calls. People who once saw him regularly now described him as withdrawn and anxious. Some said he looked paranoid, like he knew something was coming but didn't know when. And then, just as investigators were closing in, something entirely unexpected happened. Something that would shift the entire case in a shocking direction. After nearly 2 years of piecing together evidence, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing forensic data, the long-awaited moment arrived. In October 2021, prosecutors finally brought formal charges against Matthew Edgar for the murder of Livye Lewis. For Livye's grieving family, this trial represented more than legal proceedings. It was their chance to hear the truth laid bare and to see justice done. The courtroom in Sabine County quickly filled. Reporters set up outside. Rows of seats were occupied by family members, friends, and community residents who had followed the case closely. Emotions were raw. Eyes turned to the front where the accused should have been. But something was wrong. Matthew Edgar was nowhere in sight. Despite being charged with murder, he had been released on bond pending trial. And now, as the trial began, he had simply disappeared. No warning, no explanation, just silence. The defendant in a murder case, accused of taking a young woman's life, was missing. It was a stunning development. But Texas law allows a trial to continue even in the absence of the defendant, as long as they were previously released on bond and willfully fail to appear. So, with no other option, the trial went on with Matthew's chair left empty. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They introduced evidence that painted a disturbing picture. Cell phone records placed Matthew in the area at the time of the murder. Forensic experts testified about the suspicious cleaning inside his vehicle. Messages between Matthew and Livye revealed a volatile and emotionally charged relationship. Witnesses described their final moments together, detailing signs of tension and control. Bit by bit, a story unfolded. A story of a young woman who was trying to escape a toxic relationship, and a man who may not have been ready to let go. On January 27, 2022, the jury returned a verdict: guilty. Without ever hearing a word from the defendant himself, they sentenced Matthew Edgar to 99 years in prison. But justice still felt out of reach because the man they convicted had vanished. A full-scale manhunt launched the moment the verdict was read. Law enforcement swept across Sabine County and extended into neighboring areas. Helicopters hovered over wooded areas. Patrol units knocked on doors and searched abandoned properties. Checkpoints were established on major roads. The entire region seemed to hold its breath. But Matthew had disappeared without a trace. The man now legally guilty of murder was somewhere out there, a fugitive evading capture. For Livye's family, it was a cruel twist. They had waited years for accountability, only to be left staring at an empty chair and an unanswered question. Where was Matthew Edgar? And more chilling still, what lengths would he go to in order to stay hidden? The moment the news broke that Matthew Edgar had vanished, a wave of fear and disbelief swept through the small town of Hemphill, Texas. This was a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone. Now they were grappling with the unthinkable. A convicted murderer was out there, somewhere free and possibly close. Anger simmered just beneath the surface. People were outraged, not only at Matthew's escape, but at a justice system that allowed it to happen. Questions echoed from house to house, in grocery store lines, and at kitchen tables. How could he vanish on the eve of justice? Why wasn't he being watched more closely? And how had they let this happen again? But for Livye Lewis's family, the anger was eclipsed by something even more painful: heartbreak. Her mother, Tammy Lewis, had sat through every painful moment of the legal process. She had waited, prayed, and held on through the emotional roller coaster of the trial, hoping the verdict would offer some form of closure. But as the word guilty rang through the courtroom, the seat where Matthew should have been remained empty. Instead of comfort, Tammy felt a deeper kind of betrayal, one that cut through the relief of a conviction and plunged her back into the horror of loss. Livye's family wasn't just mourning her death. They were trapped in a cycle of unresolved grief. Her murder had shattered their lives in ways that couldn't be put into words. The home that once echoed with her laughter was now unbearably quiet. Her room remained untouched, frozen in time. Family dinners felt hollow without her warmth. Every birthday, holiday, or random Tuesday reminded them of what was stolen. To lose a daughter is agony, but to see her killer walk free even after being found guilty, that was something beyond imagination. Meanwhile, the rest of the town felt the ripple effect. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that Matthew was camping out deep in the woods, living off the land in familiar terrain. Others were sure he had crossed state lines and started a new life. A few feared he was hiding in plain sight. Maybe even among them, people grew paranoid. Front doors stayed locked during the day. Children weren't allowed to play outside alone. Residents avoided walking at night, and every knock on the door sent a chill down spines. The community, once united in grief, now lived under a blanket of unease. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. But Matthew remained a ghost, silent, invisible, and maddeningly out of reach. Then, just when the trail seemed coldest, a whisper surfaced. A quiet, unexpected lead, small, but promising, gave investigators their first flicker of hope in months. Could this be the break they needed? After Matthew Edgar slipped through the cracks of justice, law enforcement refused to stand down. The Texas Rangers, along with local authorities, launched a full-scale manhunt, chasing down every lead that trickled in. People from across the region reported seeing a man who looked like Matthew, wandering desolate roads, lurking near abandoned barns, even peeking through windows in quiet neighborhoods under the cover of night. Each tip sent officers scrambling, hearts pounding, hoping this time would be different. But time after time, they arrived too late. The trails were cold, the sightings unconfirmed. Matthew always seemed to vanish just before the law caught up. Weeks passed, then months, and still nothing. The silence was deafening. It was as though he had evaporated into the backroads and forests of East Texas, leaving behind only fear and speculation. Frustration grew louder, both in the community and within the ranks of law enforcement. People began demanding answers. How did a convicted murderer vanish so effortlessly? Had he planned this all along? Was he getting help? Some even wondered if someone had smuggled him out or provided shelter in exchange for silence. Even his family couldn't escape suspicion. His mother was questioned. She claimed she hadn't heard from Matthew and had no idea where he might be. Some believed her, others quietly didn't. As the search dragged on, the state increased the reward for information leading to his arrest. Flyers were plastered across store windows, gas stations, and highway rest stops. His face was on the news, in papers, and on digital billboards flashing "Wanted" in bold letters. He was now officially a fugitive, convicted of murder, sentenced to 99 years, yet walking free, unseen, untouched. And through it all, the Lewis family refused to stay silent. Livye's mother and loved ones became vocal advocates, reminding the public that justice hadn't truly been served. They called out the failure of the system, urging people not to let Matthew's escape become just another unsolved footnote. This wasn't only about Livye's murder anymore. It had become a story of failed accountability, and that made it all the more terrifying. Because as the days wore on and no one could find him, a darker thought crept into the hearts of many. What if Matthew wasn't just hiding? What if he was watching, planning? What if the next tragedy hadn't happened yet? And in that chilling possibility, fear gave way to something even worse: helplessness. What began as a desperate search stretched far beyond anyone's expectations. Weeks became months, then over a year slipped by and still no sign of Matthew Edgar. The town of Hemphill lived under a shadow, a place haunted by a killer who had simply vanished. Roads were patrolled, sightings investigated, but all led to dead ends. Yet Livye's family never stopped hoping. They refused to accept that he could disappear forever. Behind the scenes, federal authorities, U.S. Marshals, and local law enforcement quietly pushed forward. They chased whispers, watched movements, combed records, waiting for that one break. And then, finally, in May 2023, nearly 15 months after he first failed to appear in court, the silence shattered. Matthew Edgar was found and taken into custody. There was no struggle, no dramatic standoff, just an arrest that ended the long-running manhunt. Authorities did not release full details about where he had been hiding, but what mattered most was this: he was no longer free. For Livye Lewis's loved ones, the news brought a rush of emotion. Relief, certainly, but it was laced with sorrow, exhaustion, and a reminder that closure is not the same as healing. Her mother, Tammy, spoke openly about the heartache that never left. Catching Matthew didn't bring Livy back. It didn't erase the horror of that night or fill the space she left behind. Matthew was returned to the justice system he had tried to outrun. This time, there would be no loopholes, no disappearances. He was sent to prison, where he is now serving his 99-year sentence for the murder of Livye Lewis. A sentence delayed but no longer denied. Still, for those who loved Livy, justice offered only partial comfort. Her absence remains deeply felt. Her smile, her kindness, her hopes for the future, gone in an instant. Her family wakes each day knowing they'll never see her again. And while the man responsible is now locked away, the emotional wreckage he left behind continues to ripple outward. The case didn't end when Matthew was arrested. It became something bigger, a story about failure, survival, and the long road to accountability. And even now, a quiet question lingers in the hearts of everyone who followed her story. Why did it take so long to do what should have been done from the start? Because sometimes, even when justice is served, it doesn't feel like enough. Thank you for watching. Every victim deserves their story told. If you found this story shocking and heartbreaking, subscribe to Crime Uncovered and help keep their memory alive. What do you think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning everything.